You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Welcome to Public Square, a show about hot topics and current events that impact you, and more importantly, a show about how you can become more involved in the civic arena. I'm your host, Jerri Green. Today's topic, criminal justice reform. From racial profiling to over-criminalization, from mass incarceration to juvenile sentencing, activists, attorneys, and everyday citizens are turning their attention to this broad topic. Advocates for criminal justice reform are pressing for changes to what they see as structural problems in our criminal justice system. Some call it the civil rights movement of our time. And it's gaining support from the left and the right. The First Step Act, a prison and sentencing reform bill, was signed under the last president with strong bipartisan support from politicians as ideologically diverse as Senators Kamala Harris and Ted Cruz, and from advocacy groups including the American Civil Liberties Union and the Fraternal Order of Police. All sides agreed change needs to happen. Today we're going to talk to a few folks who are deep in the trenches in the work of not only bringing attention to the parts of our justice system that need reform, but proactively doing the work to make real change. First up, my friend Josh Spickler, Executive Director of Just City, a local nonprofit that has spent the last 5 years fighting for justice in Memphis. Before starting Just City, Josh was a public defender, and as an attorney in the criminal legal system, he saw firsthand how many people never get a fair shot at justice and was inspired, along with many others, to fight to make a difference. Josh, thank you for joining us today. There are so many things that I want to talk to you about, but let's start here. What do you see as the most pressing issue in the arena of criminal justice reform in our area?
Hey, Jerry, thanks so much for having me. I think we need to talk about this system like we do so many other large civic sort of public systems, and that's in terms of its success and failure. I mean, we talk about that with public health, we talk about that with transportation, education, but we don't really consider it, and we don't have good metrics, frankly, to consider success in criminal justice. If by one very rudimentary metric, you consider how often people come back into this system once they've completed a turn through it, it is a massive failure. Because the recidivism rate, which is what we call that number, is exceedingly high in most communities, and it is in ours, well over half. So we wouldn't tolerate a system like that in many places in our society, and yet this system has not been adjusted significantly, reformed significantly in more than 40 years. And so I would say, the recidivism rate, the number of times this system fails is just intolerable. We can't continue down that path.
Now, one of the very first projects that Just City took on dealt sort of with recidivism, and that was your expungement work and reducing the expungement fees. Will you tell us a little bit about that, what happened, and what's still happening?
Sure, of course. I mean, if you get accused of a crime and you're convicted and held accountable, that can include a punishment of some sort. Usually we think of that as going to prison or being incarcerated for some period of time. It can mean a fine. It can mean being under supervision for some period of time. And those are the things we think of typically when we think of crime and punishment. But the long-term effects of being involved in the criminal legal system are often more punishing. Going into a job interview every week and having to answer a question about something that is on your record from 10, 15, 20 years ago puts you at a distinct disadvantage. And so at Just City, we began to address that problem and figure out how to get people through that process of getting a job, through that process of finding a better place to stay, or getting a better education by helping people remove that record. It's a process called expungement in Tennessee, and when we started our work here, it was very, very expensive. It cost $450. We found that to be the third highest fee in the country. And so we've worked to reduce that fee at the Tennessee General Assembly. We've worked to find folks in this community who qualify, help them understand if they qualify, and help walk them through that system. And so hundreds of times in the last 5 years, we've gotten people to a clean slate, we call it. And we know from story after story after story and some data that their outcomes, their lives are much better. They're very different once they can seal that criminal history and go about their lives as they were before.
Well, that's sort of the end of the process. Let's talk about your work at the beginning of the process and money bail and reform in that area. What's going on there?
Yeah, similarly, that's a place where your wealth and your resources sort of determine what your life's like. And when you're arrested in America, in most communities, if the choice is to detain you, you're given a dollar amount that if you can pay, you can go home. And if you can't, you stay in the jail until we figure out what to do with your case. And so we are part of a big, large coalition across the country of bail funds, which raises money in the community and then uses that money to pay those bails. We pay the full cash amount. We're not bondsmen. We're not taking premiums or collateral or anything from the people we serve. All we ask of them is that they return to court, and when they do, we get all of our money back. So we've revolved about $2 million in that fund over the last 4 or 5 years. We've paid bail more than 1,000 times for hundreds and hundreds of people, most of whom, the vast majority of whom, come back to court, and their outcomes are better as well. Because the pressure of being in jail is what drives this guilty plea system that we have. The Supreme Court has talked about this. The Supreme Court of the United States has talked about how we don't really have a criminal justice system so much as a guilty plea system. And so the pressure of being in jail drives a lot of people to enter into guilty pleas that they wouldn't otherwise enter into. We see that every day in our bail fund. And we also know that when you don't have to detain as many people in a community, you can save a lot of money. A jail is a very expensive thing to run, and getting people out of it saves the taxpayers money.
So another issue where we've seen some reform in the state of Tennessee, and successful reform, I would say, would be in our juvenile sentencing arena. And there have been juveniles in the past that were sentenced up to life in prison, and that has been changing and evolving. Can you tell our viewers about that?
It has been changing and evolving on a broader scale, I believe, across the country. The Supreme Court the Supreme Court of the United States has weighed in on what we can sentence children to. So there are rules about what we can do in Tennessee. Unfortunately, I don't know as I agree that the General Assembly has acted to address the way we treat kids. I mean, we're in Shelby County, and we are a distinct outlier in this state with regard to how we do sentence kids and treat kids as adults very often and very quickly, and usually those are black children too. It doesn't happen like that in most other parts of this state, and so we've got a long way to go in this community in particular. There's been a lot of conversations, you're right, about how to reform the system, how to find some consistency across the state, how to get data that we lack when it comes to the sentencing of youth. But there's some good folks doing work in Nashville and this community on that issue, but I would just say we have a long way to go because, brain science has told us that, our brains don't finish developing really, especially for us men, until we're in our mid-20s. And so we've got to think beyond age 18 and beyond what we think of as youth justice and think about the types of punishments and the types of sentences that we're dishing out to people whose brains aren't fully formed, right? Because we're only extending that cycle when we do that.
Well, speaking of sentencing, it's sort of a buzzword these days, feels like in the news, is truth in sentencing. What does that mean exactly?
Well, I think it means kind of what it says. It's that you understand the sentence that you're getting. I mean, I think both sides of this issue, if there are two sides, would say that what we want is to know that if someone is sentenced to 2 years, then they're going to serve 2 years, or know how much exactly of that 2-year sentence to serve. And the way we've added to our criminal code in Tennessee and in most places over the last 20 to 30 years has made it really, really hard for lawyers who are representing people to advise them on how long they will serve, and it's made it difficult for the lawyers on the prosecution side to tell victims how long a person is going to serve, and that's something that they're trying to address. What the risk is here, though, is that this turns into a conversation about the length of sentences and the severity of sentences, and what we don't need are more severe sentences. We don't need lengthier sentences. There's no data to support any extension or enhancement of sentences in a place like Tennessee, which already has very, very severe and harsh sentencing. And if we're extending that and expanding that idea, it is very bad and needs to be voted down. But we do have some room for clarity in how we sentence people. We can't afford to imprison more people. It doesn't work, so we don't need to do it. But clarity is something that I think we should look for.
As far as sentencing, there's been some movement on both sides of the aisle in regards to sentencing nonviolent offenders, especially drug crimes. And we've seen in other places, such as Nashville, less prosecution or more prosecution discretion in regards to sentencing small amounts of, say, marijuana. Do you see that as something that could change here in Shelby County?
Well, as with a lot of things, and in particular right now we're having a conversation in this state about residency requirements for police officers. And this community, our community of Memphis, has spoken at the ballot box and at our city council about what we want. And the state is currently in the process of preempting our stated wants in that area. And they've done the same thing with marijuana. They've several years ago preempted both Nashville and Memphis, which had both passed decriminalization ordinances. They've made that impossible. They've outlawed that essentially. So, but there are things that district attorneys can do. And as you point out, in Nashville, their district attorney has taken a more progressive approach to that and a lot of other things, and refused to prosecute those types of things. He's been much more likely to engage in restorative justice programs. He's not pursued the death penalty as he promised when he campaigned. So those are discretionary matters that prosecutors can attend to, and in Nashville, that's happened quite a bit more than it has in Shelby County.
Well, we're going to wrap up here, but before we do, I want you to tell people how they can get involved and get proximate and get in the courtroom, as you and I were, so they can see firsthand these issues and get more knowledgeable about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that opportunity. We do have a program called Court Watch, which is just that. We're recruiting volunteers and giving them a brief orientation and asking them to go into the courts of Shelby County and just watch and see what happens and take notes and listen and try to understand as best they can what's happening. Because I can tell folks all day long how bad I think this system is, but when you see it for yourself, I think it's much more meaningful. I think the second part of Court Watch is trying to achieve a bit of accountability and transparency in a system that operates mostly in the dark. In a lot of communities, you can turn on a feed on the internet, on a web page, and watch court anytime court is in session. And you can't do that in Shelby County. And so we hope that Court Watch is just the beginning of some transparency and accountability to this system that, again, spends hundreds of millions of dollars. We have elected officials throughout our courtrooms who are operating essentially out of the view of the public. And so Court Watch is trying to address that. You can sign up at our website, and we'd love to have your help as we work toward that mission.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for educating us on these issues, and I look forward to seeing what's next for Just City. Please stay tuned as we continue our conversation about criminal justice reform here on Public Square.
GHS-TV started in 1982, and it was just a couple of cameras, a couple of on-air personality, and it's really grown into what you see today. It's a multi-million-dollar studio with top-of-the-line technology.
Being able to operate, all of the machinery in the control room, being able to use all of our software and hardware that we have around the studio is a great skill because this is top-of-the-line equipment.
I feel like this class has brightened my horizon. It's something that I never thought I would be doing, especially as a student.
GHS-TV is probably one of the most hands-on experiences a student will ever get in their lifetime.
Welcome back to Crosstalk. Nothing really has just the vibe that we have here.
Especially after you finish, you get a real rush of, wow, I just did that.
By the time a student graduates from Germantown High School, they will know pretty much every position there is, from producing to directing to on-air work.
You learn time management, you learn organization, you learn how to work with people, how to better communicate with people.
We put a lot on them, and they have to be able to have the responsibility and the knowledge to get everything that we ask them.
I had very little experience, so in the past 3 years, the skills that I've learned have absolutely exponentially grown.
The class has actually helped me figure out that I want to go to college for journalism.
When a student graduates, they are the best possible version of themselves that they can be.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.
For more information about the Kappa program, visit ghskappa.com or call 755-7775. You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Welcome back to Public Square. I'm your host, Jerri Green. Today we are talking about criminal justice reform. I'm delighted to have two wonderful individuals join us now from MICAH. MICAH, which stands for Memphis Interfaith Coalition for Action and Hope, is a coalition of community and faith-based organizations who have joined together to give a more powerful voice for issues of justice in our community. Their three pillars are economic equity, education equity, and race-class equity in the justice system. Today we have both Executive Director Reverend Ayanna Watkins and Vice President Janice Lee. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Ayanna, will you start by telling us a little bit about, when I look at your website, it talks about amplifying voices and working interdependently to create a bigger impact. Tell us about how MICAH does that.
Sure. So, again, my name is Ayanna Watkins, and MICAH's been around since 2016, and we came together because individually, many of the organizations that are now partner organizations of ours were doing good work, whether it was tutoring or food banks or things on the ground. But together, we're able to do more, doing what we call going upstream. So if you remember the old allegory, there's babies in the river, we're downriver pulling babies out of the water. Somebody has to go upstream and say, why are these babies in the water in the first place? And so together, through community organizing, we're building power to make sure that the systems that create the need for so many of the ministries that we have themselves are collectively addressed.
And can you tell us also why race and class equity within the justice system is important and one of your pillars? Janice?
Well, for us, I think that it's, first of all, we choose our issues collectively as our partnership, our coalition, and all of the different organizations that are members are that they choose what's in their hearts and the guts and what people have seen and noticed and experienced in their lives. But what we have found repeatedly is a cry for justice across so many of the parts of the criminal justice system. So whether it's in policing or whether that's in the courts or in reentry and those returning citizens, that is something that is definitely here in Memphis as one of the most, if not the most incarcerated city in the state of Tennessee. I think hands down we're the most incarcerated. But in Tennessee, that is obviously something that impacts us and impacts our community.
Tell me about how you get people more educated on the issues. I see Just Mercy on the shelves behind you, and I do recommend everybody go get a copy and read it, and then go watch the movie and cry for 2 hours like I did. But Reverend, how do you get the general public engaged and educated thoughtfully around these really serious issues impacting our community?
Sure. Well, of course, the key is that some members of our community don't have options about whether or not they're going to be engaged. As Black and brown people, not just here in Memphis and Tennessee, but of course across our country, we are feeling the brunt, the weight of the justice system. It's why there's sort of a little colloquialism called the justice system is actually just us. In that sense that, and it's shared again across our state and country. the understanding that incarceration and the burden thereof falls on those who don't have as many resources, who don't have lawyers to stay with them throughout their whole process, and who are targeted as criminals, even when sometimes they're just walking down the street, right, holding a bottle of tea and Skittles. And so for some of us, this is every day. This is close and it's front of mind. And our job as people of faith is to continue to broaden that audience for whom it is front of mind, because it does affect all of us, whether you are accused of a crime or whether you're the victim of a crime, whether you are targeted in a store while you're shopping, or whether you're the one worried if the strange person walking down your block is dangerous or harmless. And so this is work that we do with our shared values as community partners to say we believe in the dignity of every human being. And part of that dignity means being able to walk freely through your communities and be seen as a person first and not a criminal.
Janice, tell me about some of your forums that you've held online. I know recently because of COVID, almost everything's gone online, but I know I attended one where a professor from my law school, Georgetown, spoke about juvenile justice, and the juvenile justice system is very impactful. How are you reaching out to the community to get them better informed through social media?
Well, and I think that's a great question. That is one of the ways we're really working to educate and to put those issues in front of people. So oftentimes we're finding out that whether people are justice involved or don't even understand that they're justice involved, as Ayanna said, everyone is justice involved. They don't understand or have a clear understanding of the issues and who's responsible, right? Who has the power, the discretion, whatever that looks like. And so we have started a series of town halls called Seeking Justice, and we have focused on whether it was the juvenile court or the prosecutor's office or race, right? Race and youth and the impact, the intersection of that, which is so important to discuss and to understand. And then we have one actually coming up I'm real excited about. It's March 10th. That's going to be around a conviction review unit and the importance of that. And, I think I failed to mention when you asked about race and class equity, I think we know statistics have borne out that the disproportionate minority contact and the effect and impact and the sentences are so in the system are just so inherently racist, right at their core. And so, but until people understand it and see that, they don't understand how it impacts them. And I think the Conviction Review Unit is an outstanding example of how, whether you are someone who may be incarcerated or has a family member who may be incarcerated, or someone who is thinking you're unimpacted, this has nothing to do with you and you're living your life somewhere else, the Conviction Review Unit, it's a guarantee, or not a guarantee because there's no guarantees, but it is a chance to review and look at the system to see if there might be a flaw. If there's someone who is innocent who's being held responsible for something that they didn't do. And in turn, if they're being held, that means that someone who actually did or committed the crime is loose, right? And so you are impacted, whether you like it or not. When we talk about these issues, we're not talking about removing ourselves from public safety. We're talking about enhancing public safety, but public safety means safety for all. And so that is what these town halls are really geared toward, is toward educating and toward informing and making the issues real and people to understand how important it is and how it impacts everyone across, all zip codes.
Well, these seem like really big issues, tackling the court system, how we're prosecuting people, how we address racism. Seems like a very big lift, right, to go upstream. How do you keep people engaged and involved and not overwhelmed by the problem? I'll turn to you, Reverend.
I was going to turn to her.
I'm not sure.
What we could take care with, because it's a big question and an important one, and one that we lean into quite a bit. And so there's a couple of levels to the answer. For one of the ways in which we keep people engaged is, of course, that old African proverb, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. So we're trying to build campaigns that take a piece of the issue one at a time. That's how we were trained as community organizers. That's the foundation of how we work. That doesn't necessarily always translate to incrementalism, which you might hear in some of these conversations as well, just moving slowly enough not to disturb anybody. But this is more taking seriously our capacity as human beings, not just to do work, but also to hold this kind of suffering, to be face to face with this kind of hurt and harm all day long. And so on the tactical level, we're working on making sure that we're taking these issues one bite at a time so that we can get to making a huge dent in the issue and the problem itself. The other, as an organization, is that we're working on developing our own rhythms of work and rest. So that we take ourselves seriously as humans with feelings and families and other obligations, and make sure that we're constantly handing off to one another, always building leaders so that one person isn't carrying the weight of any one issue at any given time. And that's also foundational to our values, the way we honor our own dignity as human beings.
Well,
do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to say one of the big elements for me, for MICAH as an organization, is connection, relationship, and engagement. Mm-hmm. So that's how we keep people involved and engaged. I mean, these town halls are wonderful, and people do get to interact and ask questions and have discussions around these issues. But even more importantly are those community conversations, are those one-on-one conversations, mm-hmm. and with one another, with public officials, with just across the community. And I think that that's how we do it. I can't speak for everyone, but for me, it is overwhelming and it's tiring work. But every time I'm with someone and we're having those one-on-one conversations, it's so energizing, and it reminds me of why I'm here, why I'm going to stay in the work.
Well, I appreciate you both being here today. It is an election year, so I hope people will tune into you on social media, go to your town halls and forums online, find out more about you on the website and how to get more involved, because the issues that you are tackling are things that our leaders should be tackling as well. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much.
The U.S. has 5% of the world's population, but nearly 25% of its incarcerated population. Our spending on jails and prisons reached $87 billion in 2015. Today, nearly 10 million Americans, including millions of children, have immediate family members in jail or prison. More than 4.5 million Americans can't vote because of a past conviction. Racial disparities persist at every level, from the misdemeanor arrest to executions. And all too often in the American criminal justice system, wealth, not culpability, shapes the outcomes. It's clear, no matter your political persuasion, our system needs reform. We should strive for a system that operates fairly and equitably, and that respects the humanity of all of those involved. It is clear we have work to do, but how do we get there? Become a court watcher with Just City, attend a forum with MICAH, volunteer at an expungement clinic, but get proximate to the issue. Get better informed about who these issues are impacting and how. And never forget to use your voice. Let your elected officials know how you feel. Vote for them or vote them out. But hold them accountable on these issues, because it impacts us all. As Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. To get more information on our show, please check us out on the web at GHS-TV.org, where we are streaming live 24 hours a day. You can also check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And thank you for joining me, Jerri Green, today here on Public Square. Be sure to tune in next time, where we'll continue to explore important topics that involve civic engagement in our community.